Hello everyone, my name is Danny and I welcome you to my Friday Reads video. I have a book blog where I normally review books called Average Gal Reads, and you'll find the link down in the description box. I also have a Facebook page, if you just search Average Gal Reads, that will keep you updated on whenever I post a new review on my blog. My Friday Reads videos, however, are just a quick way to show what I've been reading this week. Not full-on reviews, but just a quick thought on what I've been reading. I try not to overlap my written reviews, but sometimes I, ramble a little bit too much, so you may get a review here and there anyway. This week, I haven't posted a Friday Reads video. I looked and it's been a little over a month since I last did a Friday Reads video because like a lot of people, I don't usually get busy during the summer, but I was busy for the past few weeks and it just happened to be during summer. I'm not one who has big summer activities that keep me from reading or knitting or whatever, but I just happened to have a few things that took place during summer. But I feel like I'm getting back in the groove now. I did a good bit of reading this week, mainly because I have picked some knitting patterns where I could, knit a row, read a few pages, knit a row, read a few pages, back and forth. Because I have a little bit of an issue with my hands, so I can't just knit straight through the way I used to. So, knit a few rows. As I said to somebody on Facebook, in my head it sounds a little bit like that song from the Music Man. Knit a little, read a little, knit a little, read a little, knit, 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 read a little, knit a little. Those aren't the real lyrics, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so this week I finished two books that were on totally opposite ends, in my mind, opposite ends of the romance spectrum. Well, not really romance, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. The first book that I finished was called The Cherry Cola Book Club. Here is the cover, and I picked this book solely for the cover. When the cover came up on my library's newly added releases on their digital website, this book, the cover just spoke to me. I mean, the title, the fact that it was about a book club, that was nice too, but it was like the cover design just, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by the cover, but the cover design just grabbed me. So I said, let me put that on my list. So, but it's been on my list for over a year, and I just got around to listening to it because I got the audio book, and it took me, several days. I kind of put it down, picked it up, put it down, picked it up. Finally remembered that I could speed the narration up. I always forget that that's something that you can do with your with whatever app you're using, listening to audiobooks with, partly because I started audiobooks with cassettes and then CDs, so I'm not used to the MP3 and being able to speed it up, slow it down, whatever, skip easily and what have you, bookmark places, stuff like that. But anyway, the Cherry Cola Book Club by Ashton Lee is about a book club in Cherico, Mississippi. Actually, it's about a library in Cherico, Mississippi that is a failing library, and the librarian, Mara Beth Mayhew, she got the job as director of the library straight out of school after getting her library science degree. And at the beginning of the book, she's in a meeting with the city council and being told that if she doesn't increase I want to say checkouts, but I know there's another word for it. if she doesn't increase the use of the library, they're going to take the library, they're going to shut the library down, take that budget money and put it toward an industrial park to make money to hopefully generate jobs for the town. So Maribeth is, in a quandary. What can I do? Because if they close down the library, of course, she's going to lose her job. She didn't grow up in Jericho, but it's her adopted home now, and she really wants to keep her job. So with the help of several other women in the community, she starts a book club. And so this is about, her starting the book club and trying to get more people to show up for the meetings, and whether that's going to save the library. This book is what I would call, I did do a review, as I said, on my blog, but basically I would call this a gentle read. It kind of moves slowly. That's why I had to speed up the narration on the audio book. It was either that or get the written version and start skipping some pages, because it was kind of moving a little bit slowly for me. But overall, it's good for people who want a gentle read where stuff happens, but not fast-paced excitement, edge of your seat stuff. I didn't learn until 3/4 of the way through this book that this is the first book in a series. It's an ongoing series. I think there are 6 books published at this point, and that makes more sense. That helps a little bit, because this did feel like a setup where you kind of get to know each of the characters, the married couples and the issues they're going through, the elderly spinster who is trying to who is bored and trying to find some spark in her life. The same thing that you're used to finding in like a Debbie McComber book or something like that. And except I like this a little bit better than Debbie McComber books, because in Debbie McComber books I always feel like she is telling me what happened, kind of like if I was to tell you what happened on Sunday's episode of Game of Thrones. You're hearing it secondhand. You're not getting the dialogue. And that's how Debbie McComber books feel to me. Whereas this book does have a good bit of dialogue and everything. It's just, it gets a little bit bogged down in, okay, they went and ran made copies of the flyers, and then they went to each store and handed out the flyers, and then it gets bogged down in the details of everything they did for the book club. But what saved it for me was the last book club meeting of the book. There were, where the discussion in that book club meeting, some people might call it cheesy, but it did, make me cry a little. So that made me it picked it up just enough for me to want to at least pick up the second book in the series and find out what's going on with these characters. I may not continue, but just like with a TV show, the first episode of the pilot episode of a brand new TV show, you may not always, it's not a spectacular episode, because a lot of it is the setup. You have to get to know the characters and what their situation is and all that sort of stuff. So nothing really spectacular happens a lot of times in a pilot episode. I mean, now that's not true with every TV show pilot, but in a lot of pilots, it's set up. And that's how this book felt. It was the pilot episode of the series. And a lot of times you like the pilot episode just enough to tune into a second or third episode to see, if you're really going to like the show and stick with it. So I plan to pick up the second book. I don't know if I'm going to pick it up right away, but I plan to pick up the second book and see how I feel about it. And thinking about picking up the second book in the series made me think about series in general in relation to being a booktuber or being a book blogger. Several months ago, I read one of the books in Penny Reed's Winston Brothers series, and I really enjoyed it. And so I was ready to pick up the rest of the series right away. I was ready to roll, because in the past I've always just read a series straight through. If the books were available, I read them straight through. But then I remember reading on someone else's blog, I can't remember whose it was either in a BookTube video or on someone else's blog, where they said, you don't want to just read a series straight through because it's not very interesting to the people who watch your videos or read your blog to read yet another post in the same series by the same author. You need to mix it up and present different books. And that made me think, oh, I guess that makes sense. Unfortunately, I'm not reading 12 books a month like I've done. I mean, in the past, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, when I was still working that job that really stressed me out, instead of stress eating, I did like stress reading. So I read a lot of books, and just ran through them. A lot of them were like the Christian historical romances, and I ran through them. I didn't always review all of them, but I read a bunch of them, and so I easily read 12 books a month then. But since I am not working that job anymore, and I'm currently looking for another job, but I'm getting involved in a lot of other things, my stress level has gone down, but unfortunately the amount of books I'm reading has gone down as well. I've still managed to read 30 books so far this year. My goal for the year was 50, but I'm not reading as many books as I have in the past. So I'm not reading enough where, if I was reading 12 books a month, then I could continue reading the series, but also read a bunch of other books and put some variety in my Friday Reads videos, or put some variety in my blog reviews. But I'm finding now that there's several series, ever since I read that, there's several series. I'm trying to remember if I read that this year or if it was a couple of years ago. All I know is that I have several series now that I have not finished that have kind of fallen to the wayside. I noticed it this week because I was trying to put more variety in my videos and more variety on my blog. And now I'm like, oh, I really want to go back and finish that series. I was really enjoying that. So I think I'm going to abandon that for a little while, because I started looking more closely this month at other booktube videos that I watch, and there are several booktubers who go straight from book 1 to book 2 to book 3. It seems like most of the booktubers are reading trilogies, of course, because that's what that seems to be what's popular in YA, which a lot of booktubers read. But there's other people who, like Jen, and her videos are today at Jen's Library. She's been reading that Marie Force series. I forget the name of it, but she's been reading that Marie Force series, and I think she got up to like book 16, and she'll just read one book right after the other, and she still fits in other books too. But I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to give it a try and get back to those series that I'm enjoying, because ultimately this is supposed to be about me reading and enjoying my reading. I want to present different books to people who happen to watch these videos or people who happen to read my blog, but ultimately it's about me enjoying my reading. And if I'm reading other stuff just because I think I should, but I'm not enjoying it, then I know myself, I'll end up putting it off, not writing reviews of it, not making videos because I'm not enjoying myself. So hopefully that won't make for boring viewing here, but we'll see. The other book that I read this week, which is, I'm pulling up the cover right now, which is, as I said, the total opposite end. Cherry Cola Book Club, I would consider women's fiction. There is like the slightest hint of romance in that first book. I took a quick skim at the rest of the books in the series, and I think there's more romance in the rest of the books. but the first book, at least, there's the slightest hint, so tiny, hint of romance. So there are no sex scenes. There's no, just the slightest hint that, this person and this person kind of like each other. This person and this person are kind of stepping out with each other, but that's it. That's all the romance there is. But now the other book that I read, which I just finished last night, is this one. Let me make sure there's not too much of a glare here. Okay. This is Sexsomnia. Yes, that's what I said. Sexsomnia. And it is by, the subtitle is Sleepless in Manhattan. And it is by Anya Oma. And it was translated from the German. It was released in German in 2016, and it was just released in English translation in May of this year, 2017. And I knew when I saw that title that it was going to be, a mile away from what I've been reading for the last 2 years. I'm not going to say, I hesitate to say a mile away from what I usually read, because I have read books that are more sexually explicit. But honestly, when I'm doing the stress reading, like I was telling you before, I read a lot of what they call sweet romance. I read a lot of, auntie approved romance. If you read my blog, I do things on, one thing I mention when I talk about books is, does it pass the auntie test? Meaning, can you hand this book to your auntie or your grandma or your, older neighbor lady or your friend from church and not blush? And Cherry Cola Book Club, hand it out as much as you want. The older ladies will enjoy it. There's no edginess. There's nothing that, it's nice, gentle entertainment. Sexsomnia, on the other hand, that's the book that you save for your girlfriends. Okay. The plot of Sexsomnia is that Jaden King, who owns hotels and nightclubs in Manhattan, and he has made his fortune running these hotels and nightclubs, and he is a very good looking man, and he has a lot of money, so that's a combination that makes a lot of women want, to climb in his bed. And he has taken advantage of that time and time again, to the point where he's kind of bored of all the partying and the women. So he decides that he's going to focus his energy on work. But and part of his work is that he's expanding his hotel empire into other countries. So he needs a good personal assistant who is bilingual or possibly trilingual, and can help him with all these translations and meetings and details, the things you need a personal assistant for. So his sister sets up some interviews for him. Well, one of the interviews is Abigail Davis. Well, Abigail goes through a little bit of a few mishaps on her way to the interview, and so the two of them, Abigail and Jaden, end up running into each other before she realizes who he is and before he realizes who she is. They do, sparks fly, and not in a good way. And they end up figuring out who the other one is, and she ends up telling him what he can do with his job and stomps out. Well, this is enough to make him decide that, okay, she's the most interesting woman that he's met in years, and he must have her. Okay, and the chase is on. This book, it wasn't a waste of time to read it. Because I read a lot of Christian romance, I read a lot of, I don't don't traffic a lot in all the terms that romance readers are more familiar with, but I think that what Jaden would be considered is an alpha hero. Because I read a lot of Christian historical romance, I think the heroes I read are more beta heroes. My understanding is that a beta hero is not the big macho, me man, you woman, come here kind of hero. He's more of the, he's kind and he's gentle. He's not a wuss, but he is kind and he's gentle, and he finds ways to show the heroine that he loves her without beating his chest and all of that kind of stuff. But Jaden is definitely the beat your chest, I want you, so you must come to me now. I don't understand why you're not falling at my feet, with your mouth around my male member kind of thing. And he says it a little more vulgarly than that in the book. I'm not a prude. I don't have a problem with these kind of books. I think what it was that, and I knew that with the title what kind of book it was going to be. It's not that. I think it's just that I don't mind the explicit sex if it's in the context of a love relationship, not necessarily a married relationship, just where I feel like the hero really loves the heroine and stuff like that. And I did not like the hero. I felt like his whole goal was, I want her, so I don't want anybody else to have her. I don't want anybody else to look at her. I want her to be in my bed. And I don't feel like he fully came around at the end of the book. But I still found the book worth. I read it to the end, not just because it was an arc that I got through NetGalley, but because I did like Abigail. Because unlike other books, I mean, she wasn't a totally like, kind of heroine, finger snapping, sassy type heroine, not over the top, but she stood her ground. It's like, when you did XYZ, did you consider that was what I wanted or not? That might not be what I wanted right now. And she stands her ground and she walks off. That kind of character. And so that kept me, those interchanges that she had with Jaden kept me reading the book for me to see what she was going to do next and how this was going to wrap up. So, I mean, it was worth reading for that, and for the fact that they didn't, if you were reading a book that was more leaning toward full-on erotica or full-on what some people would call smut, then they would have used the sexsomnia as a way to, they would have used it as just another kinky thing. Oh, he, she's a nymphomaniac, or he, she has this disorder and she can't stop herself, blah, 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 and that's not the way it was used in this book. It was treated respectfully, probably because I read that the author was a lab technician or in some sort of medical field before she became an author. So I think that's why the author treated it with more respect. So for those two reasons, it was worth reading. I just didn't like the hero, but it can be a good book, it can be a well-written book, and you still not like the hero. And you can still go all the way to the end of the book and not like the hero, but she likes him. I don't have to go home with him. She goes home with him. So that's how that works. So right now I am currently reading. I haven't made plans. I'm pulling up while I'm currently reading, and while I do that, I wanted to tell you I haven't really made plans for what I'm going to read in the next week. I feel kind of at 6s and 7s. I've read all of my arcs, which I wanted to do because if you've watched my other videos, you know that arcs lay heavily on me, and there were a couple arcs that I left sitting for too long. So they weigh heavily on me. So I like to get them read within a month of the release date. You know, if I can't get it read within a month before, then at least within a month after. And so a couple of those I let sit too long, and that weighed on me. So now I have no arcs in the queue. I have requested one arc. I learned my lesson, because in the past I've requested like 2 or 3 arcs, thinking that it'll take a while for them to approve me. This time I requested one arc, and I'm going to try to read some other stuff off of my backlist, perhaps catch up on some of these series that I'm interested in, like the Penny Reed series. But in the meantime, what I'm reading over at Novel Expectations, the I forget her name. Forgive me, I forget her name. I'm in her book club and everything. Sarah. Her name is Sarah. Sarah over at Novel Expectations recommended a few videos back the Cupid's Coffee Shop series by Courtney Hunt. And if you can see, let me see if I got it. There we go. So it's a series of novellas, really, is my understanding. And so I have the first 4 novellas that came, as you can see from the cover. It says set 1. So yeah, it says set 1. So it's all the first novella I'm reading is Java Frost, and that sets up the premise of there is this coffee shop in this small town called Ashford Falls, and at the opening of the book there are a brother and a sister and their male cousin. They are there at the reading of their grandmother's will. It turns out that their grandmother was very wealthy because of this coffee shop that they had owned, that grandma and grandpa had owned. And the 2 sets of families, the grandparents, kids, the 2 sets of families, when the grandfather died, they wanted the grandmother, one kid wanted the grandmother to franchise their very successful coffee shop. The other kid did not, I think. And the grandmother, anyway, there was a whole, I may be mixing it up, but there was a whole kerfluffle. Grandma definitely did not want to franchise the coffee shop, and the grandmother's kids, the parents of the current generation, were at odds as to what should be done with the money and what have you. And so they all went their separate ways. They used to all be close and live in the same town, and they all went their separate ways. And so now it's years later, and the reading of the will, the cousins have not, like girl, boy over here and boy over here, the cousins have not been friendly in years because their parents had torn the families apart because of the arguments over money and how the businesses should be handled. So grandma is now dead. There's $3 million in assets, and she says in her will that it's all going to go to the Humane Society unless they reopen the coffee shop, because in the interim the coffee shop closed down. If they reopen the coffee shop, they all 3 have to run it together for 1 year and show a profit. If they can run it together for 1 year and show a profit, then they get to split the $1 million. They get a stipend to live on and a stipend to help run the because the coffee shop's been closed for a long time, so it needs to be cleaned up and equipment and blah blah blah. So they get a little bit of money for that and a little stipend to live on while they're trying to get a profit from the coffee shop. But that's it. That's all they get, unless they make it profitable within a year. The obstacles in their way are, of course, the coffee shop's been closed for a very long time, so it's not the happening place that it was in its heyday, the popular place. And on top of that, even though their town of Ashford Falls is a very popular bedroom community, which I'm familiar with because I happen to live in what is considered a bedroom community of Charlotte, North Carolina. So there's a lot of people who live here, but they don't do things here. Like when they go to look for doctors and dentists and go shopping and stuff like that, they don't stay in the county or in the town like natives like me do. They go to Charlotte because they work in Charlotte, so they think everything's in Charlotte. They don't stay in town to do stuff. And that is what's happening to Ashford Falls in the book. There used to be a train that stopped there, and so everybody, when they would get off the train, they'd go right there to the coffee shop. They'd get a lot of through traffic that way, but the train doesn't stop there anymore, and the people who have moved there, to work in the next biggest town, they don't do anything in town. So a lot of shops have closed down, so they have that to struggle with on their road to profitability. But anyway, that's the setup for the Cupid's Coffee Shop series. And from what I can tell from this first book, what it looks like it's going to be is different people who come into the coffee shop are going to find romance. It's a romance novel, because right now the first one that I'm reading is called Java Frost, and the very first customer who comes in after they open is a woman who used to babysit the girl who's one of the three running the place. She used to babysit her when they were younger and all lived there, and now she's only like 5 or 6 years older than her, and she's now a preschool teacher. And she bumps into one of her students and her student's father, who is not with the child's mother. And of course, you can see a romance brewing. It's okay. I usually like a little bit of comedy and a little bit of witty banter in my romances. And I'm not really getting it from this first one. But I'm still going to read all 4. They're good light reads. I haven't gotten far enough into the novella to see if it feels like it's going to be a sweet romance, but one of the characters said something about heating up the sheets, so I don't know if it's going to be a sweet romance. I haven't gotten fully to the end of it yet, but so far it feels like it's going to be, sweet, clean romance and not hot romance. But anyway, that's what I have been reading this week. Hopefully I will have a good variety of things next week. As I said, I may jump into some more series that I've been looking at finishing. I have graphic novels over here that I still haven't started. My son is bugging me to read some Japanese light novel that he's been reading. So I don't know. I don't know what direction I'm going to go in. This is almost more confusing than being in the middle of a book. Once you finish a book and finish your list, you're at loose ends. You don't know what you're going to do. But if you want to read reviews of other things that I have read, as I said, I'll have the link to my blog down in the description box. And hopefully, if I get some reading done, you'll see a Friday Reads from me next week. Goodbye.